Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessings. My name's Dr. Osman Bhatti and I'm a GP and a local Cambridgeshire resident as well as a Health Hub volunteer at Cambridge Central Mosque, and I'll be doing a presentation today on having a happy and healthy Ramadan. Now, before I start this very important topic, I'm just going to highlight one of the other projects that's going on at Cambridge Central Mosque at the moment, and that's the Day by Day project, which is running this Ramadan to help support not only us to gain some extra benefit, but also to help increase donations for Cambridge Central Mosque. And what this project is, and there's more information on the website, is where we can sign up to donate regularly throughout the month of Ramadan, every day for 30 days, an amount set at £30 a day, so that we're donating every day and we will get a benefit, inshallah, over the whole month. Now, one of the other benefits of doing this is that the first 300 who do sign up on the mosque website will receive a authentic original brick, red brick, from the Cambridge Central Mosque, and it's a piece of the mosque for us to take home with us, and further details are on the website if you wish to participate. Now let's start this topic of having a happy and healthy Ramadan, and what this presentation is going to do is going to talk about several things, and what we're going to do is talk about introduction to Ramadan, talk about the food that we're going to be eating, talk about the fluids that we should be drinking, thinking about the medications, and then talking about the exercise and sleep that we must focus on really during this month. And I'm going to just do a brief overview of the introduction to Ramadan, which most of us are aware of, but just to reinforce the fact that as Muslims, what we're doing is that we're fasting from sunrise through to sunset, and during this time we're excluding food and drink and really focusing on improving our health. Now, a lot of Muslims use this opportunity of this month to look after their health as a whole, and part of that are doing things like improving their weight or stopping smoking, and it's really beneficial for us to really think about the additional benefits we can gain over the next 30 days. One of the other things that we really do focus on is the spiritual aspect, so doing more dua, doing more recitation of the Quran, and really participating in increasing our connection and supplication. Now, there's lots of spiritual benefits that we are gaining from fasting, but there are also some major health benefits. Now, some of the biggest health benefits are that it improves and reduces our blood glucose and therefore reduces insulin resistance, which is one of the things that really can help us improve our overall health and also benefit from things like a better metabolic rate and improving our weight. It can also, it's been shown that actually during the month of Ramadan, a lot of Muslims can improve things like their blood pressure and their cholesterol if they're fasting appropriately. And I'm going to go through some tips to try to really optimize the health benefits. Now, a lot of us hear about different types of fasting that is going on generally in the population. There's intermittent fasting, which is where people will fast for 2 days a week, and we know that in our Sunnah there is the tradition of fasting 2 days a week on Mondays and Thursdays, and this is something that is advocated as a really great health benefit. So even outside of Ramadan, it's really good to try to keep up this practice. One of the other key benefits of fasting is that it improves our cells, and it really helps improve the cells, improves the immune system, helps reduce inflammation in the body, and it can really help to minimize pains and aches that we have during the year, and something that we should really think about actually, how can we optimize our fasting to improve our overall well-being and have a really happy and healthy Ramadan. And one of the other things that I'm really fascinated by is that there's been lots of studies being done over the last 10 years or so that's been shown that fasting can really improve our mental health and specifically our cognition. So again, some real great health benefits that we're learning about as science evolves. Now specifically this year, what's going to be happening is that we're going to be fasting for 14 to 16 hours during those daylight hours, and specifically we want to focus on having a good state of health to do the nightly Tarawih prayers, particularly in the last 10 days. So we really want to try and optimize the way that we can prepare for this. Now a lot of us, when we start fasting, get some side effects, and these are quite common, and these are specifically headache, nausea and tiredness. Now when we start fasting, we will get the feeling of headache, and this is particularly due to the fact that we are dehydrated. So it's important to think about the fluid content that we're consuming, which I'm going to talk about. And also people have nausea and tiredness, which are usually things that will settle down after a few days. So it's worth just being aware that these things can occur, but actually with time, very early on, they will settle down. Let's talk about the type of food that we eat during our fast. Now, generally speaking, the benefit of food comes from the blood glucose, but there are different types of ways that we can manage the blood glucose in our bloodstream. So I'm going to do a bit of physiology. So we're going to start off by looking at a graph of time against blood glucose. Now when we're fasting over a period of a day, what we really want to be doing is making sure that during the day our sugar remains more or less stable. What we want to avoid doing, and actually this is what happens to a lot of people, particularly when they start to fast, is that this is what happens to their blood sugar. And what happens is that there's a rapid rise, and then there's a bit of a crash of the blood glucose which persists for the rest of the day. And what this does is that this gives the feeling of tiredness and headache, and the feeling that actually I'm starting to get more hungry. So we want to try and avoid this rise in blood glucose. Now the biggest thing that causes this is sugar. So it's important for us to think about, actually, when we're fasting, what are we doing around our sugar content, and can we reduce it? Now it's not only our sugar that we want to be reducing, because if we think about sugar molecules, glucose molecules, they are joined together to form another compound called carbohydrates. And a lot of us think of carbohydrates but don't link carbohydrates are actually sugar molecules. So it's important for us to understand how carbohydrates are processed in our body. Now with carbohydrates there are two types. We have simple carbohydrates and we have complex carbohydrates. And it's important for us to differentiate between the two and shift from simple carbohydrates to complex carbohydrates where we can, because simple carbohydrates break down quite quickly and therefore can give us a big spike in sugar, whereas complex carbohydrates give us a bit more of a sustained release. So what are the kind of simple carbohydrates that we know about? So here is a list of several simple carbohydrates that you probably are aware of. But what we want to try and do ideally, particularly when we're fasting, is replace the simple carbohydrates with complex carbohydrates. And so here are some alternatives that you can look at. So instead of sugary cereals, look at porridge oats. Instead of white bread, look at wholemeal pitta. Instead of having cakes and sweets, look at fruits and dates. Potatoes can be replaced with sweet potatoes. Instead of having white rice, think about beans and lentils, and avoid fruit juices and just go for straightforward water. And just doing this simple shift will certainly help the way that we can sustain our blood sugar over time. The other important thing to look at is the plate itself through which we pile up our food on. And it's important to realise that actually the plate should be a mix of various things. So here's a suggestion of what we can certainly have as our plate. If we divide it into three, as I've done here, and if you look at a quarter of the plate to be your carbohydrates, a quarter of your plate to be proteins and fats, and half of the plate to be vegetables and salads, you're probably going along the right way to have a healthy diet. And therefore, if you're using this template whilst fasting, you'll be able to have a much healthier Ramadan. Now it's important to note here this is quite a general approach, and it might be that, for example, if you're on a specific low carb diet, you'll be having less carbohydrates, or if you're looking to build muscle, you'll be having more proteins. And also if you're finding that usually when you fast you lose weight quite a lot, then you might want to increase the proteins and fat section as well. So it's about modifying this plate depending on your personal needs, but generally speaking this is the ratio that we want to be looking at. Now when we're looking at carbohydrates specifically, these are the types of foods that are useful for us to put onto our plate to help with that sustained release of sugar. So you can see there sweet potatoes, couscous and quinoa as the key carbohydrates that are healthy for us to eat. And if we look at the protein and fats, a lot of us will see actually these are meat and fish that we are used to, but also things like chickpeas and lentils to provide some different forms of protein, and also the fats here, so the nuts, the coconut oil, the olive oil. So looking at ways that we can adjust what we eat and what we cook with to try to see actually can we improve the content of these foods on our plate. And with vegetables and salads there are lots of choices that we have. So this is just a suggestion of the types of foods that you can have on half your plate, and some of these do overlap with some of the other content as well. So avocados, for example, have a really great fat content as well. So generally speaking, look at your plate and try to make it varied in this way. And it's important to note that this is not only just for Ramadan, but generally speaking, this is a healthy way to eat and divide your plate. Now, if you're unsure about which foods are what and how to mix things up in your plate, the other good rule of thumb is to make sure that your plate is colourful. So lots of colour, varied colour in your plate, and not just one bland colour, will show us that actually we are eating a varied diet of different configurations, and different vitamins and minerals are certainly within the foods if the plate is quite colourful. So certainly looking at that as a mainstay, particularly for our Iftar evening meal. Now let's talk about specifics for fasting, and I'm going to start off by talking about Suhoor, the morning meal. Now the aim here is to have foods that will achieve satiety, so we're going to feel fuller for longer, reducing our hunger throughout the day and also trying to stay healthy. And there's lots of ways we can look at this, and I specifically like the approach of dividing food groups into 4 and trying to select a bit of food from each section. So if we have a look at this in detail, we've got group 1, so these are your proteins and milk-based foods like Greek yogurt, where we should try to have on a regular basis. Group 2 is your carbohydrates, group 3 are your fats, healthy fats, and group 4 is your fibre and fluid. And it's really important to think about actually when we're having a morning meal, are we getting a variety from different types of groups of foods? And it's something we should be thinking about. Some other tips that I've picked up, particularly with a lot of people that I've met and learned from, is that actually we should really try to avoid skipping suhoor because it's too hard to wake up. Actually having something to eat first thing has a real great health benefit, and it's something that we should actively look to do. The other thing we should avoid is having sugary cereal. Some cereal is absolutely fine, but a lot of cereals have high sugar content, and because it's quite easy just to grab and go, it's something that a lot of people will opt for, but it's not great for your blood sugar, and therefore we should try to avoid having sugary cereal first thing in the morning. The other thing to avoid is a big dinner type meal, and by this something like curry and rice that you're just having, perhaps you had in the evening and you're having it again for suhoor. That's not great, mainly because it's carb loaded, and we want to try and avoid that. And the other real key tip is to have lots of water and it's important to make sure that we're well hydrated. The other great tip that I've seen people do is to prepare suhoor in advance. So for example, if people like to have overnight oats in different ways, and there's lots of recipes for overnight oats, then certainly prepare this the night before and you've got a quick breakfast for suhoor in the morning. Now, having said all that, some people find it's really hard to eat first thing in the morning, and in that case the simple thing of just hydrating with water and have something quite simple like a few dates is also absolutely fine, because that will give you some nutrition and some fluids, and some people find that that will suffice them. One of the things that I've learnt over time is that the key way to address your satiety and to try to keep your hunger at bay is to have something that's full of fats and protein. And these you might have heard of as fat bombs. And here's some that I've made earlier as well. So these are coconut fat bombs, which are really, really nutritious, full of fats, coconut oil being the main base. And I've got the recipes at the end of this presentation. All of this took me about 45 minutes to do from start to finish, including cleaning up of the kitchen. So it's something you can prepare really, really quickly once you've got the ingredients, put it all together, and it makes a really nutritious suhoor meal as well, and it's something that you can add in as well. Let's now focus on iftar as the evening meal, and what are the key messages here. Now, when we open our fast, the typical thing is that we're looking to eat, and often people overeat, so we have to really focus and think about this and prioritize. The first thing in your mind is, I need to focus on portion control. Now, portion control is really, really important to think about, because a lot of the time there's lots of food in front of us and we need to be really focused, and this is something that requires a bit of willpower. One of the key reasons why we feel hungry is actually our body requires fluid, and we get the request from our body saying, actually I'm hungry, but actually we're thirsty. So it's important to hydrate well, and ideally water is the best thing to have when you're opening your fast, to really get that rehydration in. And then getting some simple energy in, and dates are absolutely amazing for this. So dates with water when you open your fast, a great combination to quench the thirst, address that early hunger, and also to get some simple energy into your system. Now, the trick here is to really try to focus on avoiding overeating, and the way to do that is to pause before then having a meal. And it's amazing that actually we can take this opportunity to now pray Maghrib, the sunset prayer, and then eat afterwards, because this will give our body the chance to get the water into our system, get a bit of energy in with the dates, and actually when we then do eat, we won't eat as much, and it's a real great health benefit for us if we do it in this way. Now, the thing with eating your evening meal is that we want to try and make sure that when we do eat, we have, again, a good variation. So here, again, complex carbohydrates, lean protein, so chicken, fish, making sure we've got some fruit, get some fibre and extra fluid in there. And the key thing here is to avoid excess salt, maybe not having it as spicy, avoiding processed foods really, and also fried foods. So try to avoid those in the main. Occasionally they're fine, but actually we want to try and not have that as the routine, because again they will drive extra hunger, they would make us more thirsty, and also give us more side effects in the gastric system. So we need to try and make sure that we manage our evening meal. And again, going back to what I said earlier, really trying to make that meal as colourful as we can to make sure that we've got a good variation. So just to reinforce that, the iftar evening meal, complex carbohydrates, lean protein, having some fruit in there, and avoiding some excess salt and spicy food, processed food and fried foods. Let's now move on to fluids and talk about the best types of fluids to have when we are fasting. Now, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, the best types of fluids are water and herbal teas, and these are the things that we need to really focus on in the main. The things that we should reduce and have less of are things like tea and coffee, because they will dehydrate us. And I would actually say let's try and avoid the sugary drinks and energy drinks, because not only do they dehydrate, but they've got a high sugar load usually, so we want to avoid that and move towards something that's quite simple and straightforward. So water and herbal teas are ideal. and sometimes if you can't palate them very well, maybe fizzy water, if you're somebody who likes to have fizzy drinks a lot of the time, is a suitable alternative as well. Let's think about medications. Now, a lot of us have relatives, or perhaps ourselves, have many health conditions, and there are a number of health conditions which require medications, and here are just a few of them. Now, just because you've got some health conditions doesn't mean that you can't fast. You can absolutely fast, but you may want to review your medications because they may need adjusting a little bit. One of the key things here is that the more health conditions you have, the more medications you may be on, and therefore the condition might be a little bit more complex to manage. So whereas if you're on 1 or 2 medications, you can take them regularly without any problem. If you're on more medications, it may be something that you need to be focusing on a bit more. So really looking at these two things. So speaking to your GP or practice nurse to try to discuss the fact that you're going to be fasting and how best to adjust your medication, and also thinking about actually there are some fasting exemptions, and we should really think about actually if we or our relatives have got quite complex health needs, then we need to think about whether we fall into some of these fasting exemptions, and really discuss this with your healthcare professional. Let's talk about exercise. While fasting is absolutely a good thing to exercise, and we should be encouraged to do some light exercise. Light exercise such as walking is absolutely a great thing to do, and is something that will help our overall metabolic state. So it's good to do some light exercise like walking on a regular basis. What we should avoid doing is not to start excessive exercising during Ramadan. So don't prepare for a marathon, for example, just because you're fasting. You want to try and pace this for when you're not fasting. And you want to try to make sure that when you are exercising, you're doing this at appropriate times. And there's no ideal time to exercise, but generally speaking, some people will fast before Suhoor and then have their morning meal. Otherwise, they can exercise just before Iftar and then have the Iftar, or after Iftar as well. So there's different ways that you could do it. The vast majority of people that I know often will fast just before Iftar and then have the opening of their fast, and that will give them a good exercise routine whilst they're fasting. Let's talk about sleep. Now, with sleep, there's several things that we need to be looking at here. So the first thing here is to aim for some routine with our sleep. It's really important to have a routine, and sleep is just as important to maintain during the month of Ramadan as well. And appreciate the fact that actually if we're overeating, it will affect our sleep. So we need to really think about actually what are we eating, and is it going to impact our sleep? And if we're not focused on what we're eating and how much we're eating, it will certainly affect our sleep. And if we're looking to try to take advantage of the evening Tarawih prayers, then we need to really focus on not overeating. And even though we aim for a routine, we should still try to catch up sleep where possible. And it's really important to listen to our body, and if we are tired, just to try and get a quick nap. Now, some advice on napping during the day is that we should try to avoid sleeping for more than 20 minutes, mainly because then that can often cause deep sleep, and then we'll feel groggy once we wake up. So if we are going to be sleeping during the day, try to set an alarm to not go over 20 minutes, and we can have regular 20-minute naps, power naps if you like, just to help our sleep cycle and improve the way that we can feel refreshed. And just overall, just remember that actually sleep is just very important, and we should not forget that at all. Now, I mentioned these lovely fat bombs, so I'm just going to quickly show you these recipes on the next couple of slides. And these are really, really simple to do, like I said, and certainly, inshallah, they will be of benefit. And the first one's the coconut fat bombs. So these are the coconut based with coconut oil, and really, really delicious. And I've just coated them with some dark chocolate on top as well. And here are the nutty fat bombs. So these are very much based on, again, with coconut oil as the base, but really full of protein and full of minerals with chia seeds and flax seeds. So really nutritious, and also providing that additional satiety for us whilst we're fasting. So all there is to wish you is, I hope that this is a useful presentation for you to have a happy and healthy Ramadan.